We begin Maseches Gittin with Daf Vez in the Masechta. The Masechta discusses divorce after we discussed Saita, which is meant to save a couple from having to separate. Now we discuss what happens if the Saita procedure is not effective and they do need to get divorced. How does the divorce happen? So the Torah says the essence of a divorce is that the husband writes a document, or he hires someone to write a document, which is written for his name and her name and has a specific text, and then he places it in her hand with witnesses, and that affects that divorce. The Gemara will discuss how that works throughout the Masechta, and another theme throughout the Masechta is the theme of shlichus, giving it to a messenger who represents the husband in this transaction, and the woman also making a shliach, making an agent to represent her in this transaction. The Gemara begins by discussing somebody who sends a get with an agent from one country to another, and the Mishnah introduces that there's a concept called b'fanei nechtav, b'fanei nechtam, which is that the messenger has to come and testify in his own words. He doesn't have to bring witnesses. He has to testify that he saw that the get was written in front of him. The get is the name of the document, it's just called a get. That the get was written in front of him, and that the get was signed by the witnesses who were signed on it. They signed in front of him. Those are two things he needs to say. The Gemara is going to discuss why. What is the point? It's apparently a takanas chachamim. What is the point of it? It'll be a machlokas, which will take us through quite a few daf. The Mishnah itself is confusing, and the Gemara will explain what the different statements in the Mishnah mean. So the Mishnah begins with a number of different chachamim, tanaim, who said the statement about when we have to say, when the shliach laholacha, that is the messenger of the husband who's bringing the get, when he has to say b'fanei nechtav, b'fanei nechdam, depending on when it's brought from where. Now, the Gemara will discuss what exactly the issue is. There's something to do with the fact that we cannot establish the halachic stability of the get, and we are a bit afraid that it may be challenged. And we'll see exactly what type of challenge it could be. So we have here a few statements, and it's not going to be clear if they argue what they argue about. So let's just go through the statements, and the Gemara will explain how they differ from each other. So the first opinion is the Tanakama. He says that any get which is brought from Medina Sayam, which literally means the country of the sea, which means anything outside of Eretz Yisrael. So the messenger has to say b'fanei nechtav, b'fanei nechtam. That's from Medina Sayam to Eretz Yisrael. Rabban Gamliel says even if it comes from Rekem and from Cheger. Rekem and Cheger are Kodesh and Varid, which are two towns right outside the border of Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Eliezer says, even if it comes from Kfar Ludim to Lud, Kfar Ludim is just outside Eretz Yisrael, and Lud is just across the border from Kfar Ludim, so they are literally a stone's throw from each other, but one is outside Eretz Yisrael and one is inside Eretz Yisrael. The Chachamim say, the only time you have to say b'fanei nechtav, b'fanei nechtam is if you're bringing it from outside of Eretz Yisrael to inside of Eretz Yisrael, or the reverse, from inside Eretz Yisrael to outside Eretz Yisrael, and from one country to another outside Eretz Yisrael, from one country to another in Medina Sayam. However, implication is that from place to place inside Eretz Yisrael, you do not have to say. The Gemara will explain how is this different than the first opinion that we had. Next, the Gemara brings the opinion of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, says even from one state to another, which apparently means within Eretz Yisrael, in two places that are not on good terms with each other, and travel there is not easy. Now the Mishnah turns to what are the borders of Eretz Yisrael, how are they defined as far as this sugya. So Yehuda says the border in the east is Rekem, the border in the north is Akko, and the border in the south is Ashkelon. And those three places themselves are outside the border. Now, Rabbi Meir says Akko is counted as inside the border as far as the halachos of Gittin are concerned. And the Mishnah concludes by saying somebody who brings a get in Eretz Yisrael does not have to say b'fanei nechtam, and if there's a problem, if there is some challenge to the validity of the get, we will just certify the signatures. Either the witnesses themselves who signed on it will come and testify that they signed, or someone else will come and testify that he recognizes and can vouch for the signatures being honest and not forged. Now again, the Gemara asks, why do we need to say b'fanei nechtam? What's the point? So it's a machlekes between Rabbah and Rabbah. Rabbah says, because we are concerned that the get was not written l'shma. The halacha is that the get has to be written for the specific man and woman that it's being used for. In Eretz Yisrael, everyone knows that halacha. So if it's written in Eretz Yisrael, we have no concerns. However, if it's written in Chutz La'aretz, many people there do not know that halacha and we're concerned that it wasn't written Lishma. So there's a takanas chazal that the shliach should come and testify that it was written Lishma. That we will be comfortable with that. Now, Rava says it's nothing to do with Lishma. We're not concerned that it's not Lishma. Rava says the problem is we're afraid the husband will come and challenge the validity of the signatures and say it's forged. And with travel is difficult from the place in which it's written, and the witnesses live there, they won't be able to come here. We will not be able to certify the signatures, and the husband will successfully challenge again, and the woman will be left without being able to get remarried. In order to prevent that from happening, we made a takana that the shliach can say that he is validating the signatures himself, and we will believe him. Obviously, the Gemara is going to ask, according to both opinions, you should need two witnesses to establish a fact. It shouldn't be enough to bring one. But according to Rava, the issue is certifying that it's not forged. Now, Rabba is not concerned for that. He's not afraid that the husband's going to come. He's not concerned that that possibility needs to be head off. So the Gemara says, what's the difference between the two? What is a case in which this machlokes would make a difference as to what the halacha is? So the Gemara gives a few answers. The first answer is if two people come and bring the get. So if you're worried about certifying it, that it's not forged, so two people are witnesses, and now they're here. They're not in Chutz La'aretz. You don't have to. They're not. It's not hard to reach them. You don't have to worry about it not being able to be certified, and therefore they don't have to say b'fanei nechtam, b'fanei nechtam. According to Rabbah, however, the problem is Lishma. We're most definitely still concerned that it wasn't Lishma since it was written in Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara's second case in which the halacha will be different between Rabbah and Rava is if it's brought from one state to another state, one region to another, within Eretz Yisrael. It means one part of Eretz Yisrael in which travel is not easy to another. And there, again, according to Rabbah, that the issue is Lishma, since it was written in Eretz Yisrael, there's no problem. According to Rava, that you still going to have a hard time establishing the signatures because travel is difficult. You would have to say b'fanei nechtav and b'fanei nechtam. And the Gemara's third answer is within one country in Medina Siyam, travel is not a problem. So according to Rava, you won't have an issue. However, it does come from a place where we're concerned that it wasn't written Lishma, and therefore you would have to say Nechtam according to Rava. The Gemara now begins questioning each opinion, beginning with the opinion of Rabbah. Rabbah says that our concern is that it's not written Lishma. So the Gemara asks, how could you establish that it's written Lishma? By one person saying it was written Lishma, everything, in order to accept a testimony, has to be said by two people. If it's you're concerned that this get is pasal midarai, so you should need two witnesses. Why is it enough that the shliach himself says b'fanei nechtam? So the Gemara answers that we really don't have a real concern at all. We really 100%, and we're 99.5% sure that this is okay. This is only a chumrah, and because it's a chumrah, we only made one person need to express it. Now the reason why we're not really concerned, the Gemara needs to go through. So the Gemara first says that this is in case of Isser. It's a shaila of, is this woman permitted to marry someone else, which is a question of, is she asur on someone else or not? And the halacha is eidach haneman b'isur. And to establish that something is permitted, you only require one witness. Like if you have a piece of meat and you're not sure if it's mutter meat or asur meat, if it's kosher or treif. So if one witness says it's kosher, that's enough. So here also, if one witness, that is the shliach, says that this woman is permitted because the get was written lishma, you don't have to worry that she's not permitted and the get was written not lishma. You could rely on one aid that something is kosher. So my answer, that's only true when you don't know what the status of your isser was from the beginning. If the meat is kosher, it was always kosher. If it's not kosher, it was never kosher. There's nothing changing. Here you have a situation where this woman was definitely asur, and she has a cheskas isser. She has an established precondition of isser, which we're trying to change. Now, Allah is whenever you have an established condition of isser, you want to change the cheskas isser to change the status, or to establish that the status is changed. That is a much more difficult thing to prove. And for that, we should require two witnesses. You can't prove that from the case of where we don't know what the status ever was, and we just want to determine there's no cheskas isser. Additionally, the Gemara says this is davar sheba erva, and whenever you're establishing something that's a davar sheba erva, which you don't know, that requires two witnesses. We have a rule: ein davar sheba erva pachas mishnayim. So the Gemara answers, true, but still you won't need to have two witnesses here because we have a very significant majority that did it correctly. Roiv of Klal Yisrael know the halacha. Even Rabbi Meir, who says that we don't go with a roiv, we always are concerned that maybe in this case, person who made this was from the minority. People who write a get are the scribes of the Beis Din. The regular people don't write a get. They almost all know the halacha. The only potential concern, they all know the halacha. The only potential concern is that the guy found a tossed out get in the garbage. Very far out concern. The Rabbanan wanted to do something about that concern, so they established we should have some kind of testimony that was written l'shma. But because otherwise, if they can't establish it, the woman will be an aguna, because we'll be concerned. So they said, we don't want to leave her trapped without a valid get she can't get from her husband. So we make the standard of testimony low. And it's enough if the witness himself, if the shliach himself, as one voice says that he knows that's the shema. So Mara asks, you're not helping the lady, you're hurting her. Because the husband could always come and complain and say that it wasn't written l'shma. So if you require 2 witnesses, the husband won't complain because he won't be believed anyway. It'll be his word against 2. Now that you only required 1 witness, which is the shliach, if the husband comes and complains, it'll be 1 against 1. The husband says it's not l'shma. The shliach says it is. We're not going to know who to believe. We'll have to go l'chumrah. So you're taking risks here. You should have required 2 so that we won't have any issues. So the Gemara says no. According to Rabbah, we don't have any concern that the husband is going to come and complain and try to challenge the validity of the get, and that's because we say later on Daf Hey that the get has to be given. The shliach gives the get to the woman in front of 2 or 3 people. If it's 2 or 3 people, and because it has to be done in front of 2 or 3, the shliach is going to make sure that the husband really wants to divorce her before he gets involved in this. And therefore, we know that that the shliach made sure that the husband is serious about it, and therefore we're not concerned that the husband's going to backtrack. Could possibly happen, but it's not a concern, and therefore we don't have to try to head that off and prepare the situation so that the husband will be dissuaded or that we won't trust him.